Okay, good morning. Welcome back again. So let me just hold on a minute, please. Okay. So this is panel 3, the end of the discussion presentation sessions where we're trying to seed these little seeds of, inspiration in you so that you can ask questions, so you can think about what, we might do as next steps. My name is Nora Savage. I am a program director within NSF, the National Science Foundation, which has been mentioned here a lot. I have been with NSF for about 8 years, primarily doing nanotechnology, environmental nano, holistic approaches to understanding nano. My second love is philosophy, as David knows, and LC issues. I spent 9 years at NSF and then 15 years prior to that at EPA. So nano is sort of, I tell people it's like the blob. You touch it and just envelopes you and you just become engaged and you can't get out. So once I got, my thesis was in actually PM 2.5, but once I got into EPA and got into nano, I got subsumed. So today, we've heard some fantastic talks, and what we're going to do today for this session is measuring the impact and influence of Nano4EARTH, and the goal is to really identify these metrics or measures of impact. So that's what we want you to help us do. How can we define these metrics? Impacts could be measured, for example, in commercialized products, or even as Cynthia mentioned this morning, maybe developing that comprehensive compilation of success stories. Or as Matt said yesterday, maybe we need a compilation of horror stories of what not to do when you sort of try to commercialize nanotechnology. So before we start, I would like to remind you, the virtual participants, to please, we welcome your questions and comments. We want you to send those to the TV Worldwide. For those of you here in the audience, we'd like you to please come up to the mic, because that way the online participants can hear you as well as those of us in the audience. So with that, I'm going to pass it over. So I'm going to first just say everyone's name, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. They'll have 3 to 5 minutes to discuss their potential approach, idea, strategy, solution for how we can develop these metrics. So we have Gavin Schmidt, we have Mike Cooperberg, and we have Lee. Kelly, I'm sorry, that's so bad. It's awful. Kelly Lee. So why don't you go first, Gavin? And again, 3 to 5 minutes. Go ahead, take it away.
Okay. Is this on? This? Okay. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Gavin Schmidt. I am the director of the Goddard Institute for Space Studies, which is a NASA lab based in New York City. It's the only NASA lab in an urban environment, which is one of the reasons why I'm there. The things that we do at GIS are almost all related to climate change. And so we keep track of what is happening to the climate. You might have seen some of us on the news and in the papers last week talking about what 2022 looked like in terms of the long-term trends of climate. We spend a lot of time measuring how climate is changing, working with the remote sensing that NASA and other agencies have put in place to track both changes in climate, but also changes in the things that are driving climate change, like greenhouse gases and aerosols, and land use and land cover change. We also, and this is probably most of what we do, we work on the modeling of climate, so the simulation of climate, trying to examine the processes that are important for climate, how to encapsulate those within computer simulations, and then test those computer simulations to see how well they mimic the system that we can see outside. Now, we can already see outside that the climate system is enormously complicated, and our computer simulations are not anything like as complicated as the real world, but they're still pretty complicated. And so keeping track of those, assessing them, assessing their validity, and then using them for questions like, why have things changed? Who is to blame? What is to blame? And what does that mean for the future? Are all the kinds of things that we do on a pretty much a daily basis, not just for us, but for groups like the USGCRP, the IPCC, the National Climate Assessment. What we've found is that we actually have a pretty good understanding of what's happening to the climate. We know that the rises in greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, the CFCs, the HFCs, the changes in atmospheric pollutants, the change in deforestation, all of these things are contributing and dominating the changes in climate that we're seeing. When we do attribution studies for why the climate has changed since the late 19th century, what we find is that all of the trends are related to anthropogenic activities. Not half, not a little bit, not most, all, plus or minus a tiny little bit. And that means that when we're going forward, we can expect more of the same because we haven't effectively changed what we're doing to the climate system. Last year was the highest year on record for carbon emissions globally. And it even rose in the United States, despite the fact that the trends here have been down since the early 2000s. That's going the wrong way, right? That's continuing to put the foot on the accelerator when we really need to be going for the brake. And so the only real metric, and that was a rather long-winded way of getting to the point. The only real metric that matters is reductions in emissions. That's the only thing that matters, right? If we cannot reduce emissions, then all of the messing around, all of the other kinds of metrics that we like to boast about, like in our sales figures or in our tons of product moved, none of those things matter. Because what matters for the climate is just the raw amount of carbon dioxide that's going into the atmosphere. And until we get that down to zero, the climate will continue to warm. And the changes that we've seen to everyday weather and extremes with just the warming that we've seen so far, which is just about 2 degrees Fahrenheit since the late 19th century, which might not seem like a lot, but on the scale of a planet, it's enormous. Until we stop emitting carbon, that will continue to rise. And we will only get to no more change, not going back, we're not going to go back, but we're only going to get to, let's not make it any worse once we get to net zero carbon dioxide. And so that's the only metric that matters, and that's the only one that we should be working towards. Thank you.
Great, so I'm going to top that. Good morning. Thanks for having me. My name is Mike Cooperberg. I work for the U.S. Department of Energy in the Office of Science, and I am currently on detail. I am on loan from DOE to the U.S. Global Change Research Program, where I'm the executive director. USGCRP is a legally mandated coordination entity among 13 federal agencies. The Global Change Research Act of 1990 established USGCRP, and we exist in law much like our sister organizations. You know the Nano program. NIDRD is one of our other organizations. We share a similar structure in that we have a large office staffed with people to help implement all the coordination work we do across our agencies in our topic area. USGCRP's mission is to assist the nation and the world to understand, assess, predict, and respond to human-induced and natural processes of global change. For many years, we have interpreted that to mean climate change. You will see our program broadening its interests from solely climate, meaning the physical world around us, to the other aspects of change that are going on around us. That means changes in land use, changes in migratory patterns, changes in abundance and distribution of organisms, changes in population, changes in migration patterns. There's all sorts of things going along that are both influencing and being influenced by the physical climate. So we're much interested in making that expansion. USGCRP consists of 13 agencies, I mentioned earlier. They range from the science agencies that you would expect and recognize: NASA, NOAA, National Science Foundation, the Office of Science at DOE, parts of Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Geological Survey, and Department of Interior, Smithsonian Institution at one end. And at the other end, we have agencies that in 1990 were recognized as potential consumers of the output from global change research. Agencies like State Department, U.S. Agency for International Development, Department of Transportation. Health and Human Services falls in there too, sort of in the middle of both of a producer and a consumer of science in this area. So those 13 agencies report annually a investment in global change research of $3.2 billion. And even the federal government, where you get a little bit immune to, $1 million here and $1 million there, when you get to the billions, it's real money. That funding is dominated by NASA's Earth observing satellite capability. A big chunk of that, over half of that, is NASA's basic research budget in earth sciences and their Earth observing, or a fraction of their Earth observing satellite mission. But NOAA, National Science Foundation, Department of Energy, Agriculture, Interior, all report investments, and those investments have grown modestly over time, and significantly over the last couple of years. So there's a lot of money at stake. Those agencies sit down on a monthly basis at our table and discuss where they're coming from, where they're going, and opportunities for collaboration. We do that in a whole bunch of ways. We do it at these high-level monthly meetings, but we also do it through a number of working groups. We have working groups that span everything from understanding better the carbon cycle to observations to modeling, areas where the agencies and their program managers find value in collaboration. So we support about a dozen of those working groups, very similar to the way Nano operates, the NNI operates. So I want you to know that I'm coming to you from a very fundamental science perspective. USGCRP is the $3.2 billion is basic research. And basic research we categorize in the federal government as discovery research, just where you're giving money to people and they're out understanding how the world works around them with no particular endpoint in mind. And we also talk about use-inspired research, where it's still this very, very fundamental research, but it would be targeted by an agency. Department of Energy funds very fundamental research, but not in the same way the National Science Foundation does. There's a mission at hand in the Department of Energy, and so that fundamental science is often directed or use-inspired, if you will. So we sit down, we try to figure out where the agency is going, what the national needs are, and I'm really excited about being here today because I want to hear about the kind of ideas that come from this group, because that feeds into the sorts of ways we prioritize things and move forward. USGCRP is required by law to put out 3 products. We have an annual report to Congress that we call our Changing Planet that we put out since 1990. We have a decadal strategic plan that we put out every 10 years and then update in between. We just put a brand new strategic plan out in December of last year. Very proud to have completed that and have it on the street. And we're responsible for the National Climate Assessment, which hopefully you have run into. And if you haven't, I commend it to you highly. The National Climate Assessment is a quadrennial assessment of what we've learned about climate change in the intervening 4 years, and its observed and projected impacts on humans and a number of sectors that the law directs us to look at. So that's become a roughly 1,500-page document. NCA 5, the next National Climate Assessment, which will come out late this year, is currently open for public comment. I think that comment period closes on Monday. So if you want to take a look and you haven't, look quickly, because that comment period will close and the draft document will be withdrawn as we revise it and get it finalized for release late in 2023. So the point I wanted to wrap up my comments here about metrics, from a fundamental science perspective, and I've been in this business of doing fundamental science and then managing fundamental science is a very difficult thing to set metrics and say, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, 6 years from now, we're going to have accomplished something. And we struggle with that as a science community, both on the funding side and on the doing side. How am I going to show the progress? You can see it. I was recently involved in a very interesting conversation with a colleague who's, we were trying to set 10-year goals for stuff we're working on. And he said, what have we accomplished in the last 10 years? It was fascinating because a couple of us made a really nice list of where we are, and this was in global change research. What do we know now that we didn't know 10 years ago? It's fantastic to look backwards that way. It's much, much harder to project that forward. And so we do things like how many publications have you put out, how many graduate students have you run through your, that's a really unsatisfying metric, and it drives bad behavior in some cases. I've seen that happen. It's not about how many papers you put out. It's really about have you answered the question or served the needs. So I do have some thoughts and ideas on this, but I'm not coming to you with a solution for how you're going to solve the metrics problem. Thanks.
Kelly?
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Is that better? All right. So hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Kelly Lee. I have two roles right now. I'm the director of the UCI Science Project, where we work directly with school districts. So we're in the classroom with students and teachers and school administrators pretty much on a daily basis. So we get a real feel for what's happening in the field and what's needed in that area and that organization. And then I'm also the executive director for a newly relaunched initiative called the UC CSU Environmental and Climate Change Literacy Project, or ECLIPSE. And it's an innovative initiative that brings together every public university in California, so all the CSU's 23 campuses and 10 UC campuses together to really think about PK-12 climate, environmental literacy, justice, and action efforts. So today, I'm here to really advocate for our teachers. As a former educator myself, I taught in inner city LA. I grew up in inner city LA. I'm a first-generation scholar. And we really are thinking through what it means to teach for the 21st century to meet the needs of today. So we're here to talk about innovation. We're here to talk about solutions, but teachers don't know what they don't know. So what is the pressure and the expectation that we have for our schools, and how can we support them in order to catalyze this movement? Because education is an untapped resource for climate resilience. But when we're thinking about innovation, we're thinking about solutions, at what point do we bring along our PK-12 school districts and we start really thinking about the root causes of some of these problems? So in leaning into an educational lens and thinking about behaviors and attitudes and beliefs about pro-environmental initiatives. For example, when we're thinking about culturally relevant and responsive solutions, these solutions are only solutions so long as people use them. So a clear example today is we have solutions for plastics, right? And we're thinking about plastic waste, but are we changing people's beliefs and attitudes about how they're used? I mean, look at the table in front of you, right? So small things, like if the solutions are here, but we're not utilizing them, then what good are they? But at the same time, how can you take education and revamp and reimagine that organization as an organization of change? An organization that doesn't just sit in the community, but also has opportunities to elevate community issues with students and teachers and provides opportunities for them to tackle it in the classroom. So I'm here on this panel to talk about a couple of things with ECLIPSE and what we're doing and how we're trying to reimagine that future. But at the same time, putting on my teacher lens, when I taught in the inner cities and I also taught in a variety of different schools and I brought nanoscience to these schools, that was the first time students across these different areas saw the connection between science, engineering, and an actionable item. And it was also one of the very few classes that offered an interdisciplinary lens to learning about science. Usually it's very siloed, right? Think about your own educational experiences when you were back in your PK-12 days. Most of them, especially secondary levels, are biology, chemistry, physics, and then some elective. But if you think about the issues of today, they're more complex than that. So how can we then mimic that for our PK-12 school districts? And how do we support our teachers in being able to do so? We talk about workforce development, but at some point, how can our teachers and school districts help with that workforce development? How can we make sure that it's equitable and accessible, right? As we think about a just transition, right? Who will get access to those opportunities? And so, as we're thinking through and reimagining education, I find it quite interesting that as my colleagues here, my wonderful colleagues are talking, we're thinking about what that future could look like, and it's interesting that people can imagine a future that is more dark, a future where they can think of the end of the world better than they can reimagine possibilities for that future, right? And so when we think of that, think of your students, think of the young people of today. They are an untapped resource for creativity and innovation as well. They have, I feel like, limited opportunities sometimes in the classroom to express, identify community issues, and then also speak up in ways that are most relevant because they're also most impacted, right? This is their lived reality, to be able to then tell us, this is a solution I think that will work best for my community, and I need support in being able to bring that to light. Right? Where are the opportunities for that? So the current state of education, as we know it, is that 55% of all teachers in America do not teach about climate change. And those who do spend 1 to 2 hours on the topic. 1 to 2 hours on this crisis. You tell me how you can do that in 1 or 2 class periods, and then send that message to students that it is in fact a crisis. And so we know that what we choose to omit or what we choose to include in a curriculum says a lot about our values and beliefs as well as educators. But most oftentimes, the question is, what supports do educators have to be able to bring this in? And how do we make sure that it's in alignment with the current practices in place? Because as a former educator myself, I know what it's like to have 50 initiatives thrown at you in 1 year and then expected to be good at it. Oh, and on top of that, national and statewide frameworks to also cover, and a myriad of other items that we have to also take care of on a daily basis, like mental health with our students. So when we think about education, and we're thinking about what Gavin was sharing earlier, and he said, we know that the answer is clear. What we need to do is reduce emissions. I think education is a catalyst for being able to do just that, to be able to really think about behaviors, attitudes, beliefs about why people are doing certain things and why they're not. But then also we know that the more somebody knows about climate change and the more somebody knows about potential solutions, the more likely it is that they will take action that's meaningful and personal to them as well, especially if they can be positioned as the driver of said solutions and teachers repositioned as co-constructors of that space rather than keepers of knowledge. So again, I wanted to emphasize that I'm here definitely with a different viewpoint, but somewhat relevant in that I urge all of us to really think about positioning education at the forefront of specific initiatives, whether that be R&D, whether that be technology, innovation, design for nano, for different sectors of society. I think that we're not shining a light on a potentially large resource here, and for education, we're always forced to play catch up. You all design, invent, create amazing solutions, and then however long that takes to get to PK-12 sectors, because they're not always connected to their local universities. They don't know what the 21st century solutions are that are being developed. We teach them after the fact. We're not really brought along as partners. And so, thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, panel members. And I did want to say that our fourth panel member, Dr. Barbara Kahn, who leads SNOW and who's at EPA for many years working with me, and she actually spearheaded most of the environmental work. And Nano, I will say humbly, she did that. Had a home emergency and so was unable to be with us today. And so I'd like us to send her warm wishes and good thoughts for, getting back to us soon. So as Kelly said, not only do school teachers have to, especially K-12, have to deal with a myriad of responsibilities and burdensome tasks, but they also have to do it on a ridiculous salary, which is something that if we really think education is important, why are we not putting more money into it? As Gavin said, one of our metrics should be just reducing the emissions that we're putting in, the emissions of greenhouse gases. And then as Mike talked about, we need to think about this across, of course, all our agencies. So as you think about what you heard from our speakers, how can you envision that we as a society can begin to develop metrics or ways of measuring that we're attaining success, or that we're at least striving, as we heard from Gavin, in the right direction? We're not going backwards, we're not going in the wrong direction. Are there approaches or things that we can do that will help us at least get a handle on where we are, or where or our progress, how we're moving down the line? If you travel, you measure your travel by, how many layovers you have, or, how long it takes you to get to your destination. How long is it going to take us to get to our destination? And maybe, as Cynthia said this morning, not maybe, we definitely need the near term, the short term, the middle term, and then we need far long-term solutions. I think we need all three, but what we're discussing here, for the NNI's perspective, NEHI's perspective, is really looking at some of those near-term ideas and solutions and metrics. So don't all stand up at once, don't all raise questions at once. Let's get some ideas about how we can begin to do this.
Hi, I'm Steve Ruffin, Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And my question is for Dr. Lee. Yeah, I was listening to some of the challenges that you were talking about at the K-12 level, and the importance of literacy. And so I was wondering, are there standardized curriculums, supplemental curriculums that you are aware of that's out there that maybe we can engage the community on to get that access to schools across the country? Because I've worked with a lot of schools, through the community, through PTA and other groups, where there are supplemental clubs and supplemental organizations and grassroots organizations that teach in the evenings and on the weekends, so that the burden is not just on the teachers, but you're teaching from that standardized supplemental curriculum that we're all kind of making an impact. Are you aware of any resources like that, or how to access those kind of resources? Because then I think, just as a start, just measuring the number of communities we've impacted by getting those resources to them is a start. And then marrying those with the local and grassroots organizations that can supplement evenings and weekends to get their messages out is a start. So we could build some metrics around it. But I just wanted to know if you had any ideas around resources, curriculums.
Remind me again your name. Sorry.
Steve Ruffin.
Steve, thank you for that question. So my apologies, especially if my colleagues are joining online. When I introduced Eclipse, one key piece that I should have mentioned is that our innovative partnership is not just between the public school systems, but it's also through California community-based partners that focus on environmental and climate literacy as well. Because we know that our outdoor or informal, non-formal educators in the aquariums, the wetlands, all of these wonderful museums are doing such a great job with outreach and communicating about climate change, yet there really is no formal way to connect with a PK-12 teacher. And as a partner, not just, I'll take my kids there on a field trip and then the next day, okay, now we're going back to learning about atomic theory, right? What are ways that they can actually work together as partners? And so yes, really thinking through models that currently exist that work is one of the initiatives that we have to take on, because that curriculum that you're talking about, if I'm being truthful, if we're trying to be culturally relevant and responsive to the communities that we serve, there is no one size fits all. And my dissertation work through UCLA was to address exactly that problem that you shared about, which is with teachers, we don't know what to cover with climate change. It is so big. It's interdisciplinary. At what point do we lean on our colleagues in other subjects? What does an interdisciplinary approach look like if we ourselves have not experienced that? Our teacher preparation programs are not training us to do that yet, right? And so, long story short, there's not one thing that works, but I'm happy to share that there are incredible resources out there that have been developed by different states that offer a solution for that state. And I can share that leaning on your community-based partner to be able to do the work shares that responsibility that and also that messaging that it is a community problem to address together, right? Because with our community-based partners, they have knowledge, they are able to support our students as environmental stewards. But yes, there are resources. I see NASA Wavelength as an incredible resource. CLEAN is out of the NOAA office as well. They have incredible resources, but I think maybe this is something we can connect about after, so I can also share.
Great.
And then just a quick plug, due to my dissertation work, I'm also the author of Teaching Climate Change for secondary teachers as well. So my work was really connecting with 50 environmental organizations, taking the NGSS standards, or the next generation standards that some states have adopted. It covers about 30% of climate science, and then really thinking through what does that look like in practice, because knowing is not enough. In this stage of the crisis, teaching about the science is not enough. We have to help students to take action. We have to activate that agency already within. So long story short, there's a myriad of responsibilities, but not one that is going to be one size fits all and works, right?
Thank you. And I look forward to talking to you afterwards.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, so NASA as a whole has a lot of resources for educators that stretch from lesson plans to actual interns to citizen science projects to research-based summer programs where high school students can come in and work directly with teachers and undergraduates and scientists on real projects. And then we put out lesson plans based on those things. So if you want to go to the NASA Education Office or the NASA GIS education pages, it's not everything that you might want, but there are some good things to see there, and you can really engage directly with the science that we're doing.
David?
Yeah, thanks, Nora. Great to see you, Nora. I wish we had Barbara here, but
Yeah.
hi, Barbara.
Yeah.
I went through my notes from my 579 class on climate change and what the metrics exercises surfaced in that class. I just want to share them that we came up with 4 in the graduate class on climate change, which was first, not just carbon, but all greenhouse gases. But with that number 1, we have a nice triangle we use where the base is the most powerful of all the metrics, and how much we're actually impacting the amount of carbon and greenhouse gases that we release. Second, how we're improving the efficiency of the sinks, ocean, land, etc., and how these can be important metrics to look at. Of course, we're moving up that triangle. Third, how we can mitigate the interactions that are taking place, the physical interactions that are taking place. And that's where a lot of the wild geoengineering sometimes enters into the debate. And the top one, which was how effective we are at improving resiliency to the consequences of climate change. And so what the class exercise is we evaluate how well government and government agencies, both here and abroad, are in these 4 metric areas. And of course, Dr. Schmidt, you're totally correct. Like, I mean, unless we do something to reduce the amount of carbon we're putting into it, a lot of these exercises might be desirable in and of themselves, but I'm not sure how powerful it might be. The other thing I want to mention is I really get concerned when people talk about the existential nature of climate change, because the science communication literature, of which we have data, right? We collect data on this stuff, so we actually know this is true. There's something called apocalypse denial, which is a big problem, that if you start talking about how existential this threat is, people just start rejecting the message. right? They don't listen anymore. The fear has reached its maximum level. There's also mortality salience, which is that if I'm not personally experiencing climate change, I don't react to it the way someone who does experience it does. And so the dynamic that takes place is completely different that happens in these situations. And the bottom one, which is always the number one, and then I think Kelly will agree with this, is numeracy. It's the number one problem in America. We just have people who can't handle numbers. And what ends up happening is you have probability neglect and a whole bunch of other phenomena that occur. And so when you're trying to put these messages together, they're incredibly challenging because of those three. And there's good data on all three of these problems. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
David, can I respond to that?
Please.
Really
Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead, please, Kelly.
There was something that you mentioned right now, and it made me think. You said people don't, they might receive the impact differently if they don't personally feel it.
Right.
And I would add on to that not everybody realizes that the impact is due to climate change. So for us, when we think about PK-12, there's a lack of helping students to develop systems thinking skills. Like, I'm from Los Angeles. You've all heard, I'm sure, of the recent storms that have been hitting us, right? Most people aren't connecting that to a larger issue here. It's more like, oh, it just happens. Oh, the wildfires, yes, they're stronger than ever before. Oh, that's just how things are, right? But they're not developing a systems thinking lens where as these larger than ever storms or extreme weather events continue, they're not necessarily asking what the root of the problems are. So I think that when I'm talking about reimagining education for the future, it's to meet the needs of the 21st century, but really helping skills to develop those complex critical thinking skills that questions misinformation, that questions things around them in their environment, right? Isn't science about understanding the world around you? But we have to help them also connect those dots so that when they feel an impact or understand an impact, they can make those connections more coherently. So thank you for that.
Definitely need to talk in the future because the thing we've learned about the educational system is that even when you expose young people to a lot of change, how desirable the change in the process of growing up, they interact with all these different other variables, which often cancel out or produce these weird loops in their understanding of where science would be. One bad middle school teacher can really kill a student in terms of where they go with science. And we've looked at this. But I think that all of this apocalypse effect is really fascinating because the fear grab is really weird. It's simple. And then it just starts rocking. Right? So you get their attention, but you don't get any of their interest.
Or that sense of doom and gloom. Who wants to sit with that, right? Yeah. So when teachers lean into solutions, though, and innovation, like Nano can do, that's when I think the engagement is higher for students, when they realize, I can do something about this problem that's meaningful to me and my community.
I mean, let me add something to that. I mean, one of the key conclusions that has become, you meant the distance into what you said as well, right? So what have we learned in the last 10 years? Right? So one of the things that we've learned in the last 10 years is the extent to which future change is almost entirely driven by our future actions. Right? So if we stopped emitting carbon dioxide tomorrow, right, global warming would stop warming, right? It wouldn't go back to where it was, and so we've still got the situation that we have. But the temperature would not continue to rise, right? And that's a very interesting piece of factual information that's relevant to your question of agency, right? Because if the things that are going to happen to us in the future are because of our actions in the future, then we control them, right? We have, as a society, we have agency. And I think it's important when you're talking to not just to PK through 12 folks, but everybody and and even all the way up to our colleagues on the Hill. You have multiple roles, right? You're not just a consumer of water in plastic bottles, right? You could stop doing that. That would be great. But you are or will be a voter. You are or will be a voice in your town council. You are or will be a letter writer. You will be a conversationalist. You will be a agitator. You may be an activist. You may be a protester. You may be somebody who decides on the energy systems of your new school or your new building or your new library. Right? All of those things are decision points where your actions and your understanding will make a difference. And there's never going to be a point where you stop making a difference by making better decisions, right? So that's always going to be there.
Thank you.
You want to add anything, Mike? Or I don't want to
Please.
cut anyone. Okay, go ahead. No? Okay. No, okay.
So I'll frame this with a common thread that's coming in through some of the questions of, for everyone here, what would it look like in 5 years if you're asked to come back and say, oh, this Nano4EARTH was a success? What does that look like to you? So I want to give you a verbatim question from Cynthia Friend, our keynote, who's still here and sending in questions. So she says, I think it is important to define what success is in the near term and the long term for all of these issues. Cost benefit should also be considered. How can we define success and how can we evaluate cost benefit? Where would you start to each of you?
So let me start with that, if I may. I wildly oversimplify world because I like a simple story. And I think science can help the world in two fundamental ways. If you have a problem today, and whether it's nanotechnology or nanoscience or atmospheric science, we have been supporting, the people of the United States, the federal government has been supporting the science community for forever. And we have developed expertise and a knowledge base. And we can point the problem holders to that knowledge base today, instantly. And we get phone calls all the time from within the government, from outside of government. And I'll say, here's the person you need to talk to. And maybe it's Gavin Schmidt. We lean on some of our close colleagues frequently. We can help you today because we've been investing in this for years and years and years, and we have established this knowledge base, this broad expertise across the nation. And in the short term, the kinds of time frames you're talking about, we can't do new science. We can't, you got to get the money. You got to put the proposal, the call for proposals out. You got to review the proposals. You got to get the money out. It'll take 4 years to get the funding in the hands of the scientists. So what we can do today is leverage the knowledge we've already invested in and we already have. And I think that's really important. The science community thrives and advances on addressing important questions. And so when there's an important question that people go, well, that's not a good enough answer, it's like, fantastic. That's a perfect thing for us to invest in. Come back in a decade and we'll have a better handle on this. You can come up with examples. You may be able to solve some kind of very niche problem in a shorter time scale. But in general, if there's a really fundamental question that we can't address to the satisfaction of the problem holder, that's wonderful for science. We'll go invest in that area, and we'll build a community and an expertise base. But it really does function on those two levels, and it's really hard to break that cycle of, today's questions could be addressed with today's knowledge. The questions that we're going to address down the road, we need to invest in down the road.
I find myself at a bit of a disadvantage since until I was invited to this panel and this conference, I knew absolutely nothing about nanotechnology. So, and I'm a little better off now after yesterday, but not, I have to say, not huge. These questions are very general questions. How do we make a difference? And and are we making a difference? Because that's what we want to do. We want to know that what we're doing makes a difference, right? The first step is obviously awareness, right? So education, not just formal education, but informal education for people who haven't been to grade school in decades. Education for the people that get to those people. So through helping people in the media understand, particularly on television, right? So television does a terrible job on climate change or any kind of complicated problem, because television is very fond of simple narratives, right? So people often talk about communication being, oh, it's all about storytelling. And that's true, right? Because that's what we're kind of hardwired for. But there's only, there's a number of stories that we keep using all the time, and they kind of are paralyzing because they're generally not complicated enough to match up with the complications in the middle, right? So we tell ourselves stories as scientists about how much impact we're having. Right, oh, my paper got downloaded X number of times, and I have my H index is so high, and how much of an impact am I having? And it's like, and as soon as you start quantifying these things, people start to game them, and then it's like, oh, well, is that really useful? And then people point out that your H index really doesn't mean anything, because the longer you live, the higher your H index gets. And it's like, well, I haven't done anything other than survive. and so that turns out not to be terribly useful. A lot of these things, we want them to be formalized because we can count them. I work for the federal government. If something can be counted, somebody will be appointed to open an office of counting, and then there'll be like 20 people in charge of counting things, and that's not the point, right? The point is not to count things, but it's very hard. And to answer your person that asked the question, you see success when you see it, and hopefully you'll recognize it for what it is. But this notion that everything that matters can be counted, and that everything that can be counted matters, is a little bit of an illusion.
Yeah, but you're fun. And,
tell that to my daughter.
It's on record. It's good. So for me, just something that you said at the end resonated. And I would just push it one step further and say, we'll know the success when we feel it, like when our community members feel it. In California, there was an op-ed piece that came out by one of the teachers in the state that had been teaching for many years, and he pretty much, when you think of California and climate change education, I think we really are making huge strides, but we can always do more, and we should do more. But this individual said, this is all I'm hearing about for my state, but I don't feel supported in the classroom. I don't feel that I'm teaching climate change education in the ways that I'm hearing about for my own state. And when I read this piece, I thought, challenge accepted. Because when that teacher feels the change and feels supported and then feels that they have confidence to be able to do that, then we know we've succeeded. So I know that's not necessarily quantifiable, but I was thinking, what would be indicators of success in the short term and long term? And I was thinking, well, we need to know how many teachers across the United States, specifically which states within that state, which regions are teaching about climate change and to what depth, what are they teaching, what supports are they getting, then we can get closer to the answers of how we can support them. But right now, it's so broad, we know the majority aren't doing it, but also, to go back to David earlier, many teachers are teaching about these topics, but they don't even realize that it's related to climate change. So when we are studying these impacts, they might not even know that they're doing it because it's so broad and it's so big, what to cover and how much of it to then clearly state, yes, I am teaching climate change in ways that will help students to be able to engage civically, right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that comes up a lot when we talk to media folks and people whose job it is to do these things is that they often think that all they need to do is like, oh, we did a 3-hour special on climate change.
Yes, we've done it.
Like 5 years ago. Like, isn't that enough?
Right.
And the answer is no, it's not even close to enough. It's nothing. It's like, because they treat it as a topic to be covered, like a story to be covered, as opposed to this insidious thing that actually goes through everything that happens, right? You're talking about, the weather and the disasters in California. Well, California's a big place and a lot of bad things happen. There's fires, there's drought,
there's a lot of good things
flooding.
too.
Also, it's a big place and there's a lot of good things too. Yeah. So, but people aren't used to like teaching all the things that they know about already, and then just like kind of okay, there's a climate change aspect to that. There's a climate change aspect to this. You talk about foreign policy. Well, there's a climate change aspect to that. You talk about history. Well, there's a climate change aspect to that. You talk about economics. You know what? There's a climate change impact to that. And how you talk about these things, right? Given the context of climate change, well, you might do a little bit of a different job. For instance, teaching people about economics, right? Models that assume infinite growth, that have no damage functions for continuing climate change as a function of that economic growth, right? Those are not good models to be training our kids on and our future leaders and our politicians on, right? And yet that's what they see, right? And you've got a situation where you have everybody that goes through the Wharton MBA program. Well, you know what? AI can replace you already, right? We don't need more of it, right? We need something else.
So to piggyback on that, you said, there's a climate change aspect to essentially every topic that we can teach about, and it should be in cyclical and iterative ways for students to build upon their knowledge. And my ask is, well, how do teachers know that there's a climate change lens to that? If they are not directly connected, and really all they have is whatever professional development might be offered, right, or Google, and it's an endless search. And you just said, oh, this economic model isn't great, but yet that's what's out there. How does that teacher know that that is not a great way to approach this subject? Right. So I would say, and just to piggyback and add on a couple more indicators, is I think for us in 5 years' time, especially for the state of California, because we have incredible initiatives and partners doing this work together, we should see it in every teacher preparation program, that every teacher in every subject is not only knowledgeable about climate change, very key foundational items that everybody should know about to give them strong skills and confidence, right, in order to enact this, but also pedagogy needed. Because it's one thing to know about it and it's another thing to teach about it, absolutely, right? Absolutely. And so for me, an indicator would be how many teacher preparation programs across the United States have a dedicated class, course, seminar, something about teaching about climate change to prepare our teachers. And I think that's something that we can measure and see growth over time with. But
it's not so much teaching about climate change, it's teaching about how to integrate climate change into
which is a whole other thing. That's right.
That's right.
It's great conversation. Matt?
Thank you. Matt Hull of Virginia Tech. I'd like to thank each of you for being here and sharing your insights. It seems like a common theme that's been emerging is sort of what we need to do now versus what we need to do in the future. And you see sort of two strategies, the investing in transformative technology, or I'd say translating technologies right now, but also investing in transformative technologies for the future. In that first bucket, in terms of translational technologies, this is probably specifically directed toward DOE and NASA. Some of the most shovel-ready technologies may be sitting in your intellectual property offices right now. And I would just ask if you could comment on, and I think in the vein of metrics, those are things that are pretty easy to track. Are we, how effective are those technologies in terms of being licensed to companies that can move them forward and advance those technologies? Can either of you comment on that topic in terms of climate relevant technologies developed at DOE or NASA and where they stand in terms of translation?
Yeah. So NASA takes that very seriously, right? So we have an office for counting how many things we do along those lines. But we actually, we do obviously develop a lot of tech. We We do that through competitive grants, right? So, like, we need this kind of technology. Somebody tell us that you can do it, we'll give you some money, right? We do it through prizes, right? So we have competitive efforts where, recently we had one that was related to the manufacture of organic materials from carbon dioxide, with an eye really to manufacturing things on Mars, right, where you don't have a lot of other raw materials. But the three groups that came through to the finals there, they were all also using that technology to explore direct air capture of carbon dioxide here on Earth. Now, my personal opinion is that is only ever going to be a niche contributor to the situation. But there are clear links between our understanding of what we need for exploring the solar system and the technology needs that we have today. And so we've been using lots of different kind of innovative ways. Some of it is research grants, so people will propose and we'll fund them. Some of it is prizes, some of it is directed. And then when we come up with something in-house, we actually help people both patent it, find partners, and get it out there. And so we try and be quite active on that. And so we have, I'd be happy to show you some examples of that.
So the federal government's a big enough place that I'm more familiar with parts of other agencies than I am with the whole of the department or the agency I work for. I am aware that these sorts of things go on in the Department of Energy. I live in the Office of Science, and we put on our pointy hats and we study things that we study. I'm not very familiar with energy technology. It's just not my thing. We work very closely through something called the Small Business Innovative Research Program. A fraction of every dollar that the federal government uses in basic research is dedicated to small business innovative research. And we use quite a bit of that in the Department of Energy. We spend a lot of money in the Department of Energy, so that tax, if you will, amounts to a significant amount of money. And we use that to invest often in technologies, a lot of times in measurement technologies. We're trying to, our community is struggling to measure a factor or to do it efficiently or cheaply or faster, and we'll use SBIR funding to invest in technologies to advance our science. It's not the same thing as solving, not in the immediate sense of solving the energy problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I have to make it shorter. I'm very short. I'm Victoria DeStefano. I'm at DOE in the Office of Science. And if I could just respond a little bit to the question about tech transfer. Our national labs do a lot of energy research and have their own tech transfer kind of areas where they also kind of push technology to market, as well as our Office of Technology Transitions, the Department of Energy, that was mentioned yesterday. So just for my question, though, I was going to ask, you mentioned that, H-index publications aren't necessarily kind of the best way to measure impact of fundamental science. So you mentioned you had maybe some ideas or thoughts about the best ways for us to measure the impact of fundamental science. I know it's a non-trivial challenge, but...
I don't actually have any ideas. I run a lab and I try and measure, I try and assess, the contributions of each of our different teams, and it's all very kind of touchy-feely. Oh, they seem to be doing well. They seem to be getting attention. They seem to be publishing interesting papers, not just papers. They seem to be tackling important problems, and a lot of that is like kind of seeing what's going on around. To what extent are people talking about the people that are working with us, right? To what extent is their research like piquing people's interests? Some of that is, and it's all kind of a little fluffy, and so I don't have any answers. I'm sorry.
So fake this out, Gavin.
Victoria, I've been at this for 20 years at DOE, and I am absolutely convinced of the need to make these fundamental science investments with the firm knowledge that we're going to need the answers down the road. And We can't wait until the questions are in our face to say, that's a great idea, we should study that. We can't. It doesn't, because society won't wait for us to, well, come back to us and we'll understand that better. When Dave Keeling, atmospheric chemist who was interested in CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere, started making measurements in the late 1950s, he was just interested in how much CO2 was in the air. And it turned out it changes diurnally. It changes, it's different in the daytime than it is in nighttime. You're seeing drawdown and respiration and photosynthesis. It's like, well, that's interesting. And he kept making measurements. It's like, oh, it changes seasonally too. It's like, huh, what do you know? It's now called the Keeling curve. 40 years later, 50 years later, we have this undeniable record. He didn't start out to identify climate change or the role of fossil fuel combustion, in the world. He was just interested, and we, the Department of Energy, was a major supporter of that research for a long time. So I don't think you can expect, but it's the anecdotes. It's being able to say, we couldn't have done this without these investments. Almost anything we do and touch on a daily basis, we can track back to some fundamental lasers. We're not looking for a way to scan our groceries. That was, or measure the distance to the moon. It was optical physicists that were like, hey, look at this. This is kind of cool. Look what we can do with this light. So I'm completely convinced that we must make these basic investments with the firm knowledge that they're going to provide a knowledge base that are going to answer important questions down the road.
I'm not against fundamental research, obviously, but there is a real role for co-production of useful science, where there's fundamental science that is being done, but it's being done in partnership and in co-production mode with people who actually have the problem, or who have a technology, or who have an issue, and it turns out that if you silo the fundamental science from the people who you think of as going to be using it, you end up with a whole ton of science where somebody in their grant application they say, oh, this will be of use for these people, and they've never ever talked to those people, right? And they have no idea what these people will actually use. And we end up with a lot of things that pay lip service to the point of science being used and applied, but not actually doing it. And when we've actually sat down with people and you ask them, well, what do you actually need? What is your problem? It takes a lot of back and forth to work out what the overlap is between somebody's actual problem and our actual knowledge, and then to get those things to close it. To find paths of research that allow those things to mesh should be and is a topic of scientific research. It isn't just we take a laser off the shelf and suddenly we scan barcodes. Those things had to be meshed at a very fundamental level for a long time before you had a useful application of that technology. Right? And when it comes down to, can we help people be more climate resilient? And this is something that your program works on as well. We could discuss why we're not doing as well there as we could. It's because there's a huge amount of information that's being generated, but almost all of it is totally inaccessible for people who are on the ground who need that information. And finding ways to bridge that kind of high-level production of information and data and knowledge and ground-level users is a massive challenge and actually requires further research on how to do it, right? But my point is that research, like if you don't do it, then these things never get connected, right? And so, yes, do the fundamental research, produce the data, produce the information and the knowledge, but we have to fund the applications research, which isn't just taking something off the shelf and giving it to somebody over there.
So am I butting in front of you? May I amplify?
Sure,
Gavin?
because Gavin's very contrary.
Go
Go ahead.
So if I'm sitting here worrying that, You know, I wear Brandon's hat in another world. I'm like, have we answered the question he asked us? And I'm not sure we have. So, but I think that's the answer. If, you know, and this is a little bit of a program manager's knee jerk, but it's like, I would get a room full of nanotech folks, you know, your community, and I would sit them down with a room full of climate scientists, and I'd go at this. And your deliverable, the metric, might be a research pathway, a research roadmap, and changes in budgets down the road, or I mean, it could, for example, I'm speaking like a federal bureaucrat, but that's so okay. What are the big questions that we're not, what do we need to get from where we are to where we, with a lens of nanotech on it?
I don't know necessarily climate scientists, but applications folks, managers, water resource people, building code people, architects.
You're looking for now something to point to a deliverable. That's one way to get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely think the federal government and other aspects like NNI are going to be good. The convening power, bringing people together, just like the event today, for having those discussions. So, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. So we have time for two more. I think we're supposed to end at 11:45. Is that still the end time, or is it okay? So why don't you go and then?
I'm Martha Knight. I'm the director of the founder of CZ Biotech. I'm not directly in the nanotech industry. I've done some peripheral work in it. So this meeting is very useful for me, and I'm very happy to have in front of me experts that can answer some questions. I've always had an uneasy feeling, living through the rhetoric and the direction of science, or the rhetoric of our public reality and science policy and government policy. I have an uneasy feeling, and I think the modeling that's been done years ago, maybe you know the answer, but what if we just, what the main thing that we've lost from the end of the 18th century is forest lands and increase in bad lands around the world. And we have, vast deserts in some areas, and maybe we know how these deserts came about. What if we just implemented the simple solutions to the problem to return CO2 levels to a more equilibrium level? Has modeling been done about just reclaiming land, carrying out the policy of that as a means of solving the problem?
So yes, I mean, people have been looking at this for a long time. People have been looking at natural-based solutions for carbon sequestration. People are looking at storing carbon in coastal ocean areas. They're talking about planting large numbers of trees. They're talking about increasing the carbon content of soils. All of those things are, in fact, both being tested and being explored. So let me reassure you that we have not forgotten all of those things. Unfortunately, the scope for that in dealing with the emissions that we're putting into the atmosphere is limited, right? So there are a lot of you might have heard about the Trillion Tree Initiative, where they're going to plant 1 trillion trees, right? Which is about a third more trees than there are right now. And you calculate how much carbon that's going to sequester, and it's like a week's worth of emissions, right? We are putting, we're putting 10 gigatons of carbon into the atmosphere every year. Gigatons, and a tree is big, but it's not a gigaton. And trees, and we're doing it every year, so you have to keep on doing it every year, and there just isn't enough land to do that. People are exploring all those solutions and a lot more, but they don't quite add up on their own.
So then the answer is really to go to the fuels that don't give off CO2.
Yes.
And another comment I wanted to say, 50 years ago, the rhetoric we heard a lot was the big problem in our world is overpopulation. And look where we are now. Every major nation is going down in population except India. So this has been an effect of what has happened in the world as well. And that's just a comment I make about that too.
Thank you. Okay.
So a lot of the comments have related to partnerships and getting the right people in the room, and I think that was a really important part of having this event over these past 2 days, is to get climate people and nano people in the same room. So what are some of the best mechanisms and potential partnerships for implementation of this challenge throughout the N&I community and outside of that? What people are we not connecting to? What mechanisms are there that we should be tapping into to really get a concerted, large group, large tent effort here?
I'm not part of that community, so I have no idea.
Well, it's not just nano, it's the climate community too, though.
So
yeah,
for the climate research community, much like for the nanotechnology community, these two offices exist, and they're, one of the things I think we're really well suited for is as a nexus, for making these sorts of connections. What you're talking about beyond the science and nanotechnology side is what are we doing about climate, and that's a much more diffuse community. It is not centralized in the federal government. It's happening all over federal government. All sorts of great things are going on, but that community is not connected the same way the science community is. And that's something that we recognize and probably ought to do something about.
Do you have something? Gavin? Oh, I thought you were going to say something. No? Okay, but then to round it up, I'm going to swing it back around to education to say that I don't know that I would have gone into science had it not been for my 5th grade science teacher who taught us the scientific method of inquiry, a sort of version of that, where you observe something, you make a hypothesis, and you test it, and maybe you have a theory. And I came home one day, and a letter I sent to my cousin was returned because the stamp fell off. I saw my cousin every day, so my mom didn't think I needed to write her a letter, so she gave me an old stamp, and it fell off. So I thought, if I address this backwards, do I need to use a stamp at all? That's my hypothesis. So I addressed it backward to my cousin, and I scratched in the corner, and I wrote on the back, if stamp falls off, please replace. Well, the post office decided to be magnanimous, so they mailed it to me, which is not what I wanted. But I still thought I had a valid hypothesis, so I said, I'm going to try it one more time. So I refined my experiment, and I just wrote, from my cousin to me. I didn't put anything, I didn't scratch anything on the corner, I didn't put any note on the back. Then I forgot about it. A couple of days later, my cousin called me. She was delighted because I had found a way to send free mail. But I was delighted because I was a scientist. I said, boy, I'm a scientist. I have a theory. That excites me. And so to get back to what Kelly says, I think if we can nurture that excitement and that stimulus in kids, we don't have, it's not just a long term, it is going to be a long term, but it's also a short term. We can get them thinking about some of these things that we think as old people are so challenging and complex and doom and gloom. They might be able to really add something of merit to it. So I just want to swing that back around to education, because that's another sort of love of mine. We have a couple of minutes. If there's any other further comments I want to swing it back to my panelists. If they have a final comment to make, you want to start, Kelly, and then we can come down this way.
Yeah, I think in today's session, I've talked a great deal about the need to support, invest in education and our educators, really for students, because students are our future, right? They're going to be the ones driving these solutions. They currently are. I mean, when we think about climate change, the youth are the ones on the front lines really thinking through how to challenge systems at scale. And so, based on your comment, it just made me think, how do we connect not only with science and innovation and different communities, but really what I didn't hear was education community. Like, where does that fall in? And we can't be the afterthought. If we really want to think about how to mobilize our teachers and students and schools and reposition them for our society, we have to be brought along as partners, thought partners, co-constructors, at the table, right? So I really appreciated this opportunity here today to connect with wonderful colleagues and to really think about advocating for education, not only for the state of California, but in thinking about models of success. What would that look like? Could we inspire some other states out there to also think through what climate change education for their state looks like, but then connecting with ours and sharing success, researching about it, sharing, these opportunities to connect. I don't know if those conversations are really happening. We are just as siloed. And I think that is an issue, and it's a systemic issue. It's not, climate change isn't a California problem, right? It's everybody's issue, and of course communities are disproportionately impacted. And I think Nano, if I had a chance to go back in time, that's what I would actually study. It has lit up my world, and also thinking about how to really engage and fire up students in thinking about solutions for the future, in applying science, technology, social science, and context, rich context, to thinking about how we can make a change for our own community. I think Nano has these opportunities, but then I also think about equitable access. Are these courses accessible to every school? What's needed? It's very expensive to run these experiments. And I lived in and taught in Title I, right, mainly. And so I think about, okay, what does that look like if I were to address a systems issue, not just like this one school district has this one issue, but if we were to broaden that lens and think through how can we support more widely, what could that look like? So I think that this is a really rich conversation, and I'm very grateful.
Thank you. Mike?
Let me stick with Kelly's theme. And my approach of stories, if you think back to ways we've changed the way the country thinks about things, cigarette smoking, seatbelt wearing, forest fires, these are all long-term sustained educational campaigns where, the kid gets in the car and says, Daddy, buckle up. I learned it at school, it's safe. And how can you can't fight that, right? You put on your seatbelt. So I completely agree. It starts at the beginning and with education awareness, and I couldn't think of a better way to invest our time and money.
Thank you. And Gavin?
Ditto. Education, we should all be aiming to be lifelong educators and students. Somebody earlier on, mentioned, the various publics that we need to reach. It isn't a one-size-fits-all. There are many different paths to reaching different kinds of groups, and finding, kind of trusted gatekeepers within those groups, and helping them be leaders in their areas and with their communities. We have exactly those same questions with climate change writ large, and so it's important. And you can't. There's no magic bullet. You're not going to find your Nano spokesperson who's suddenly going to be on all the TV shows and writing op-eds and in the classroom and things. I mean, we can do a lot now with technology that we weren't able to do, or that was more problematic earlier on. Right? But post-pandemic, we have learned and are learning to run hybrid, more accessible events. We don't need to have physical people in physical classrooms when that would be problematic. We can reach a lot of people. We can reach people from across the world. We can reach people across the room. I mean, sometimes we have meetings at work, and literally everybody's on the screen, but they're next door. Okay, which is probably not ideal, but we can do that whether they're next door or in California, right? And we can reach out to more and more people. I particularly appreciated the fact that this meeting was hybrid, and that you've made efforts to make it a good hybrid meeting, which not everybody does, and that's welcome. And I think going forward with that attitude of inclusion and education, those are the stepping stones to making anything happen. So I think that's good.
Okay, let's give a round of applause, please, for our panel members. And now turn it over to Brendan.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was thinking, don't want, hopefully no one from the Postal Service is coming after you, Nora, but.
Oh, no, yeah, that's what my mom said. She said, you're going to jail, that's federal offense. And then I said, but no, I'm a scientist, that's the point. It wasn't the free meal, it was the idea that.
But I was just thinking, I have the good fortune of being able to interact with a lot of students, and there is still an appetite and an excitement about this nanoscale world, right? And I think there's also a similar, if not a greater, excitement about tackling this incredible challenge that the next generation is going to inherit from us. And I think that if one of the solutions is, frankly, getting those two communities together more and matching the needs with some of the solution providers, we can at least move the needle forward. And I think that that's something that we can all, in our own communities, do more of, to take advantage of these two topics that are so easy to get people excited about if we just put in a little effort. So anyway, on that note, we have a half an hour break for lunch. Many of you guys already know your way to the food court. For those of you who don't, head back down to the metro area, and there's food down there. We're going to reconvene at 12:15. For those folks online, my understanding is that you need to refresh your browser in order to get the new Zoom link for the final session. So thank you very much, and thank you to the panel and to Nora especially, and looking forward to further conversations over some food.
Yep, thank you.